Back. It is a wicked Wednesday on Liquid Lunch because so much is happening around the world, around the globe. We saw the supposed escalatory event yesterday where the Iranian regime fired a dozen dusty old rockets into a couple of empty bases. No U.S. service people were hurt, as far as we know, although the Iranians are saying 30 are dead. But they probably needed some good PR back at home. The Dow Jones loves it with the market up over 200 here. And I think that'll continue throughout January if these geopolitical fears tend to remain eased. But someone who was a big critic about getting our soldiers out of the Mideast and out of Afghanistan, one of our favorite, if not the favorite, military strategists, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, retired from the U.S. Army, senior fellow at Defense Priorities, joins us today. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us again.
It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Love it.
How are you? And I know the other day we had you on, we were talking about, you weren't happy about the strike. You thought it was, too much. And I know you've been a big advocate for just getting our troops out of harm's way all across the Mideast. In some ways, I thought, Trump did something that Obama never did. They crossed the line. He projected strength. He took action. And while everybody was telling us about the escalation, I mean, you're a military guy. Was their response proportionate to what we did?
Well, I mean, we got to also recognize, number one, very happy that no one was killed. I mean, great sigh of relief because we knew that they were going to have to do some sort of retaliation after we took out Soleimani. And at least so far, it appears that this was probably an intentional, concerted effort by Iran not to cause any more casualties. Because while they had to do something to save face, and even among their own people because of this, they also don't want to go too far that will cause Trump to make good on his threat that he would hit, 52 sites, whether he leaves out the cultural sites or not. And it's clear that he could wreak, devastation on the Iranian regime and on their oil infrastructure. And they didn't want to trigger that. But they had to do something. But I'll tell you, though, that the threat is past for the moment, but the danger still is there for two big reasons. This morning, after Iran's foreign minister had sent out that notification that they're done, that they've retaliated, that it was a proportionate, and unless we did something more, they're not going to respond. After that, the Hashd al-Shaabi and several of the other Shia militia in Iraq, whose leaders were also killed in that same strike, said, okay, now that Iran's finished, now it's our turn. So the risk from smaller scale assassination attempts, sniper shots, IEDs, other kinds of rocket attacks on installations elsewhere, that still remains. So our troops are still very much at risk.
Well, we have a much lower standard to going after these terrorists that you're talking about because they're not part of a sovereign country. These terrorists, we don't have nearly. Do you think in some ways Trump's projecting strength has reinstated our policy of deterrence?
Well, I'll argue that we had them absolutely deterred all along. And because of the reason that they didn't fire anything to kill any American troops, at least so far, is the same reason they haven't done anything before. I mean, we're choking their economy off. I mean, almost completely cut out all their oil sales. I mean, they are deeply hurting. If anything, this maximum pressure campaign has succeeded. It certainly has succeeded in hurting Iran, but it has utterly failed at getting them to do what we want, and these things keep on happening. So they were already deterred, and they'll continue to be deterred as long as we don't push them in too far of a corner. And the other issue that I was telling you is that we need to watch out for is that Trump made clear in his speech here today that Iran will never be able to have a nuclear weapon, and we're not going to permit that, implying that we would do something if they move that direction. But yesterday morning, before those retaliatory strikes, they said the JCPOA is done. They're not going to abide by any of the agreements anymore. So that sets the stage for what's going to happen next. Even if there are no more strikes, is Trump going to continue to sit passively by and say, okay, you're moving now toward this, or will the call from Washington and so many others that we need to attack them again, that starts to rise and we get right back in the same position?
Colonel, it's great to talk with you again, and we really value you coming on the show, not only because of your significant military expertise, but because unlike a lot of armchair generals and TV pundits, you've actually been in the field of battle as a decorated veteran, including Iraq, both in Operation Desert Storm, where we liberated Kuwait, and then again in 2009. I am curious about what the way forward is. From here on in, given what the president said, given what Foreign Minister Zarif said, assuming both sides do have an interest in de-escalation, how do at least the Americans go about doing that?
Okay, number one, first and foremost, I'll tell you again, the same thing I've been saying is the first step. We need to get our troops out of there. And there's a very practical, fundamental reason to do that is because they don't even have a military mission right now. I mean, forget about whether it's accomplishable or not. They don't even have one.
Well, the rationale is that there's still ISIS fighters there, and we need an American.
We've suspended the anti-ISIS fight. We've suspended training the Iraqi military. All we're doing right now is defending ourselves, and all we do is put a target on their back. So from these hostile Shabis, or if Iran decides they want to do something later, they have that ability. But if we get them out of there, that takes a lot of the leverage away they even have for any kind of retaliation. So the first step, I think, is that we need to get them out of there. But the second thing, and this may be even harder, and I'll tell you, I'll admit I'm an outlier here, but if Trump wants to negotiate a better deal, which is what he campaigned on and what he repeated again today, any kind of a deal, inherent in that is that the other side has to come away with something that they want. And people in this city here are loath to allow Iran to get anything they want. They just want to dictate terms and then have them surrender and take it. But they're not going to.
Well, I want to follow up with you on that,
That's not exactly
Colonel.
agreed. That's not exactly a negotiation. We got to give them something in a give and take.
Colonel, let me play for you what the president said with respect to what he'd like to see NATO do from here on in. This was the president speaking just about an hour ago about this situation with Iran in the Middle East.
The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process.
Colonel, what do you think NATO's response to that is likely to be? And can NATO actually play a helpful role here in bringing Iran back into the international community?
I'm not sure that NATO is the right organization to do that. But, I mean, look, we got to recognize that many of our NATO allies and European friends have been very much against this. I mean, they've been doing everything in their power, both in public and behind the scenes, to get us to come to some kind of an agreement, because they've been desperately trying to save the JCPOA, because they view things very differently than we do. They don't think that their security is at risk, and they think that they can have business opportunities there. And that's what they've been pushing for. So it's unclear to me why they would suddenly change now and do the opposite of what they had been doing. But NATO is a military alliance in the first place. So if anything, it might be the European Union or the Great Britain, France, and Germany, who have been very, part of the original JCPOA negotiating team. Maybe they could, but I'm not sure NATO is going to be in a position to do anything.
Colonel, I really liked when the president said, hey, we just spent $2 and some odd trillion on upgrading all of our military weaponry, and we give raises to our soldiers. I liked when he said, we don't want to use it. We're upgrading, but we'd rather not use it. I think he kind of left the door open to some diplomatic progress.
Well, he has, and I'm advocating absolutely we go down that road. Additionally, before these comments made, he also said, anymore, it's time for the Iraqis to take care of their own security, all the things that are right, all the things that are, America first, all the things that he campaigned on, that people voted for him on, that I voted for him on. I'd like to see him move that a little bit faster, though, because literally every day they're there, that puts a target on their back, and I want to see that target taken off.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you, and I think, based on the vote of the Iraqi parliament, and supposedly we're only in Iraq on an invitation. If they revoke that invitation, it may be the perfect timing for the president to say, all right, let's get on out of here.
Well, yeah, and in our organization here, we're saying, look, I mean, if they don't want us there, why spend any more money? Why spend any more American blood for somebody who doesn't even want us there? You guys need to handle your own security. The time has come.
Exactly. Now, Colonel, let me ask you finally about what you referenced earlier about the people in this city, Washington, D.C., who want a state of perpetual war with Iran. Why is it that Saudi Arabia, a nation that at best at least turned a blind eye towards both Al-Qaeda and ISIS, even in the run-up to September 11th, a nation that represses women's rights, human rights, every right that you can have, that's basically a Middle Eastern, middle-aged theocratic dictatorship. Why do we have no problem with Saudi Arabia doing things like executing people for sorcery, and yet Iran, we have a vested interest in the think tank world, in the media, and in the halls of Congress of making sure they're seen as the Middle Eastern boogeyman? Why is that?
Two reasons. 1979, when the hostage crisis, that was even on Trump's mind when he listed 52 targets in reference to the 52 hostages that were taken. And the second reason is because of their routine chants of death to Israel. And that gets lots of people understandably, excited and angry. And so those are the main two reasons. But I argue that, number one, we do need to reset our relations with Saudi Arabia and, a little bit more distant, maybe a little bit more professional, and where common cause, comes together. Let's work there. But I think we also can and should move in a similar regard to Iran, because, look, we don't need to have this strong military force over there because Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, they're more than counterbalancing a very weak Iran. So the regional balance of power is against Iran, even without us there at all. So we don't need to be there for our security because the region will balance them, and we always protect our own self no matter what anyone else does.
Fantastic. Some of the best insights you're going to get on television. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis joins us, Senior Fellow at Defense Priorities. Colonel, thank you so much as usual. You're great. And one of these days, we got to get you in here in person for a little liquid lunch.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks a lot. That's Colonel Dan Davis from Defense Priorities. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back after this with Johnny Burnett and David Eisenbach. And they're going to mix it up on impeachment, on Iraq, on Iran, and all that good stuff. We're coming back at you right after this.